Welcome to the Brew Crew Review Podcast, the show by fans for fans of your Milwaukee Brewers. Welcome back, Brewer fans. This is the Brew Crew Review Podcast, and we're coming at you today. It's myself and Scott. How are you doing, Scott?
Not bad, not bad. Couldn't ask for much more out of that series, huh?
Nope. Our colleagues Chad Collins and Vince Frederick not be with us today. Vince is in some faraway country doing great things, I'm sure, and Chad is probably in some type of porta-john somewhere locally in the West Dallas area also doing great things or the opposite of that. So anyway, moving right along, yes, the Milwaukee Brewers are going to the National League Championship Series, only their third Championship Series appearance in their near 50-year history, and they did it by sweeping the Colorado Rockies 3 games in the NLCS, and they've now won 11 consecutive games, Scott. 1 win away from getting the George Webb's hamburgers for free. This has not happened since 1987. That's 31 years. Both Scott and I were much younger fellas back then, still collecting baseball cards, I believe. So it's been quite a while. And this is amazing, and pretty fired up about it. So what are your thoughts on how the Brewers got to this point, Scott?
Well, I guess first of all, if you're a bandwagoner just jumping on the Brewers bandwagon, this is a perfect storm for you because not only are the Brewers, obviously trying to fight for their right to get to the World Series, but there's free hamburgers at stake. So there's kind of a lot going on.
So let's rewind for just a second before we recap the awesome sweep the Brewers has had in the NLCS over the Rockies. Going back to a couple of podcasts ago, the Brewers had just started this 11-game winning streak by winning. I think they had a 1-game winning streak at the time. We were starting a 3-game series in St. Louis, which we had already earmarked as the biggest series for the Brewers in September on the road last week of the season. Both the Cardinals and Cubs are still jockeying for first place and playoff spots at that point. Going into that podcast, Scott, and this was only a couple of weeks ago, we, at the Brewer Review, were not even 100% confident that the Brewers were going to be a playoff team.
Yeah,
I myself was. I felt that we were going to at least be a wild card team, and I was actually pretty excited about the possibility of the Brewers hosting the wild card game at Miller Park just so I could go to another Brewers playoff game here in Milwaukee, and boy, have things turned for the better since then. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I think I predicted I'm pretty sure I predicted that we were going to lose 2-3 in St. Louis, but I still felt that we were going to make the wild card. But just to, quote, run the table, it was kind of ridiculous.
And, I mean, the confidence and the momentum the Brewers have going up to this point is, I think, something that you can't really put a value on. And I think that it's going to be really give the Brewers an opportunity to reach the World Series for the first time in 38 years. So I'm pretty excited about that, and I'm sure all Brewer fans are. How are we doing it? Well, first of all, obviously, we swept the Tigers. We swept the Cardinals on the road. We swept the Tigers at home to finish the season. Fourth of the game, 163 against the Cubs. Went down to Wrigley, beat the Cubs, knocked them in the wild card game. The Rockies knocked them completely out of the playoffs. Boo-hoo. The Brewers moving on. Home field advantage throughout the NL playoffs. And that came into the play right away in the NLDS. We took the first 2 games in Milwaukee. Started off with a bullpen game. Then Chacin and Miley took care of the rest. And the Brewers, unbelievable pitching in that series. And the 3 games against the Rockies, and I believe it was, because it was a 110-inning game, that was 28 innings. The Rockies only scored 2 runs. They only scored, the high-powered Rockies offense only scored in 1 inning. The 9th inning against Jeremy Jefferson game 1, which I happened to attend. Mike Moustakas came through and walked us off for a victory that gave us to propel us through the rest of the series. We swept the Rockies. They went home and just they didn't know what hit them, Scott. Like, it was unbelievable. How is our pitching this good?
I don't know, but it really seems like Craig Counsell and David Stearns have a plan, and it certainly seems like it's working so far. I mean, just a great job of juggling the pen, putting in people in the right situations. I mean, even Jeffers, you could say, was kind of a tough luck inning, although it couldn't have been that tough luck because we were about a millimeter away from giving Charlie Blackmon a double that would have completely changed the outcome, or I guess not necessarily the outcome, but just the look overall of that game. So overall, just, yeah, absolutely phenomenal.
So the great thing about the way that the Brewers are built, to me, with this great bullpen that includes 4 former closers, all with all-star level play. You've got Corey Knebel now. You've got back and looking like it's his 2017 form, which was basically one of the greatest Brewer release seasons ever. You've got Joakim Soria, who has been also a former closer, all-star, been great in his role. You've got Jeremy Jeffers, who's actually doing the closing duties now. He had a little bit of hiccup in game 1, came back in game 2. Craig Counsell showed him the confidence, gave him 2 innings, a 2-inning save. He locked that down. Then you've got Josh Hader, the most dominant left-handed pitcher, reliever in baseball, the most lethal weapon out of any bullpen possibly ever. I mean, I don't want to be throwing out Mariano Rivera type comps or anything like that, but I mean, Josh Hader is better than Andrew Miller. He's better than any other lefty. He's a weapon that strikes fear in opponents late game. If you're down a run or 2 against Milwaukee Brewers, anytime past the 6th inning and Josh Hader is available, you're in trouble. So it's unbelievable. The recipe has worked, and the Brewers have not lost in quite a long time. Now, the momentum that they have going into the series, which we're going to preview in this episode, Brewers against the Los Angeles Dodgers. The winner of the 7-game series will go advance to the World Series. Game 1, Clayton Kershaw. Game 2 at Miller Park, Walker Buehler. The Brewers still have not announced their starters yet. There is a 4-game layoff. The Brewers wrapped up their series this previous Sunday, and Game 1 does not start till Friday. Do you have any concerns about that little bit of a layoff kind of halting the Brewers' obviously 11-game win streak momentum, or do you think that it was a nice time to rest the arm, so to speak, and get them ready for this series?
I mean, if it were up to me, I mean, I guess I would hope that the layoff would only be a couple days, but I mean, both teams are going to have the same amount of rust, I guess, if there even is any. I don't expect it to be much of a factor at all.
Yeah, I agree with you, Scott. I mean, the Dodgers also wrapped up their series on Monday by taking their season against the Braves 3-1. And unfortunately, they didn't get forced to a Game 5, so Clayton Kershaw is available for Game 1, and the Brewers will see him multiple times, most likely through that series. But the Brewers have fared fairly well against Clayton Kershaw, and he also has quite a poor track record in the postseason overall. I believe he's sporting an over 4 ERA in his postseason career, so that could change any moment because he is uber talented. But the Brewer bats, I mean, the pitching, we're obviously pretty confident in that, and the Brewer bats have to be alive more so than they have been, though, through that Rockies series. Through our Game 163 and the 3 games against the Rockies, we did win all 4 of those games, but we're averaging only 4 runs a game through those last 4 contests. I think our bats are going to have to do a little bit better than that if we want to win this series. And against the Dodgers, who are to me a superior team than the Rockies, and they have great depth. Their starting pitching is pretty unbelievable, and their bullpen I think is better than the Rockies, just at least on par, if not better than the Rockies as well. and they have a deep bench similar to ours. I think we match up pretty well against the Dodgers, but it does scare me a little bit that they have David Freese on their roster, because the last time we were in the National League Championship Series against the St. Louis Cardinals, David Freese was a complete Brewer killer, and I would like to see him strike out every at bat if he gets any during this series. But anyway, with that being said, this Dodger team is definitely dangerous. They added Manny Machado at the trade deadline. Obviously, everyone probably knows that their emerging star shortstop Corey Seager was out for the season, and that's why they went out and required Manny Machado to play short, and he's been having a pretty good postseason so far, and he's quite the weapon for them to add to a team with this limitless payroll and uber talented arms. But I think the Brewers, and Stern, I think, built this team with such, varieties that he can come after them with, like right-handed batters off the bench, that I think we can hang with them for sure. And I'm going to, we'll do our prediction at the end of this podcast, but I really feel the Brewers have momentum on their side, and I don't think the national media knows what to think of them. And when they look at the starters, that we can't even name our starters for games 1 and game 2, because Counsell honestly probably doesn't even know who they are. I mean, that's why it's not like he's doing tricks or anything. I don't think he even himself knows who they are. I would throw out there that Justine would most likely start game 1 or 2. I'll predict that one of the other 2 games, possibly game 2, would probably be a bullpen game, similar to how we let out the Rockies series, just because, we do have an off day after game 2, so our bullpen can get some rest if we do a bullpen game 2. I'm going to predict also that we're in Dodger Stadium in games 3 and 4. They're going to most likely start in those games lefty Ryu and Rich Hill in those games for the Dodgers. And I think we're going to counter with our 2 lefties, Wade Miley and most likely Gio Gonzalez. I don't know in what order or anything, but I really think those are the first 4 games. That would be my guess on what's going to go down. But what are your thoughts overall on the pitching matchups and how Counsell's going to attack this, I guess?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if there's a bullpen game in the first 2 games. I think it's entirely possible it could wind up even being game 1. I mean, it could be the type of thing where, we throw somebody out there in game 1, and if they get a lead, we might literally just punt the game and say, oh, well, let's have Hader for multiple innings the following day. But actually, that kind of leads to my question. Counsell has not really been interested in throwing multiple innings of Hader on back-to-back days. But hey, we're a couple games from a World Series here. So I think at this point, I'll ask you your opinion of it. But I think at this point, I think if you had to ask Hader to throw 2 innings every single game in this series, I would still say that that's got to be done. I think that this is crunch time, and there's no point in saving anybody. You've been saving people for this, and this is the moment.
Not only, I agree with you completely, Scott, not only could it be done, it absolutely should be done. I mean, there's built-in off days. If this game goes 6 or 7 games, there's going to be 2 off days in between those. That's much more than the Brewers are accustomed to during the regular season when we got by with similar, setup. Obviously, we don't have the luxury like we did in September to have such a deep, 40-man, roster to work with, to expand the roster. We're back down to 25, and there's quite a few good players that we've had to leave off the 25-man. But with that being said, Josh Hader, this is the playoffs. He's available every day for 2 innings if need be. I mean, there's some, obviously, if there's in one of the 2 innings he throws like 50 pitches, that's going to put him in danger of being less effective the next day. So obviously there's going to be some, some things to consider. But with that being said, this is the playoffs. There is no tomorrow. You burn out these arms, they'll recover in the off season or whatever, overall. So I don't think we're going to hesitate to bring them in for multiple innings, like you're saying. I was a little surprised. One of the games against the Rockies, he actually brought in Hader just to get one lefty out, and then took him out. And so I don't foresee that. If Hader's coming in, I expect them to go more than 1 inning, and pretty much every outing he's out there. But it all depends on when we're going through the heart of their lineup, and I think that's the luxury of having this he's almost like a roving closer, but he's beyond an elite closer. He's like, it's just that's what makes him such a really unbelievable weapon, because if there's a rally started anywhere after the sixth inning, middle lineup, whatever, you put this guy in and the fire is completely put out. And that's it's kind of innovative. Obviously the Brewers using him in that stance, but I think it's really valuable come playoff time, and I think it's going to factor in huge.
Yeah, I think even when we've looked at people that are used to just working one inning, like Aroldis Chapman or somebody like that, I guess they've always said that they're gonna, in the playoffs they go out there for multiple innings too, and so you're not really saving them for anything. I'm thinking back, I forget when it was. I think it was in July, that maybe early August, I forget. But there was definitely a series where we went through like a 12-day span where we hardly used Jefferson Hader at all, just because we were saving them and we're not going to bring them out there when we're behind. And I think that philosophy also goes completely out the window now too. We're not, there's no point in saving them for tomorrow because you might not get a chance tomorrow. So it's definitely time to man up and get those innings.
I think 3 or 4 years from now, when we look back at this postseason, Scott, on our podcast then or whatever, I think we're going to be stunned with the actual amount of talent that was on this team, because I believe that Freddie Peralta, Corbin Burns, and Brandon Woodruff are the young X factors in this whole equation. These guys that are going to take up multiple innings in the middle of a game that are very, very valuable, especially when we do these bullpen games. I think in a couple of years from now, they're going to be fixtures in the Brewers' rotation, and good ones at that, especially Burns and Peralta. Woodruff too, possibly. But, I mean, for the most part, I really see those guys being future starters, and they're going to be used in like 2 or 3 innings apiece when needed, when necessary, given that they all make the roster for this NLCS too. But, I mean, we saw Freddie Peralta come up huge in that first Cardinals bullpen game that we experimented with 10 games ago, and then the same thing in Game 1 against the Rockies. Both Burns and Woodruff pitched great. Woodruff started that game, or was an opener, or whatever you call it. He pitched 3 great innings. Burns pitched a couple, and Burns also came in Game 3 of this NLDS series, pitched awesomely well in the road in the thin air of Colorado too. So I mean, that guy's just got ice running through his veins as a young guy, and he pitches like a veteran, and really happy for his future as a Brewer. But I think those guys are just as valuable, because with their young inexperience, I think telling them they're only going to, face 6 batters, we need to get 6 outs or something like that every time they take the ball. I think that it has a different mentality than handing the ball to a young star, like, well, I got to go through this pretty much all-star lineup always and try to get this team through 5 innings. Well, we're not asking you to do that. We're asking you for a couple of awesome innings. I think it really takes the pressure off those guys, and they're really coming through for us. And this formula is working out really well, amazingly. And just like we were flummoxed by the possibility of it earlier in the season, the national media now is looking at this like, I mean, the Dodgers are throwing out these uber all-star pitchers, and we're just like, oh, we'll just toss in some openers from our bullpen, and this is the matchup. Like, I don't even think the Vegas people know how to set the betting lines on these games or whatever, because the pitching matchups are going to be so ridiculous. So I don't know. It's going to be an interesting series. I guess what do you think are the other factors and how the Brewers are going to get to the World Series this year, Scott? What's going to have to happen in a series besides this bullpen continue to dominate, those middle X factor guys continue to do their job? Obviously, the actual openers or starters, what do you want to call them, like Justine, Miley, Gonzalez, guys we want to go 4 or 5 good innings minimally before we turn over the bullpen. Those guys have to continue to pitch well too. What are your other main factors? Obviously, we have NL MVP Christian Yelich on our side, who's also hit Kershaw amazingly well as a left-hander. What a weapon he's going to be. What are your other factors that you think are really going to push the Brewers over the top, or that needs to happen for the Brewers to advance?
Well, both teams are incredibly deep, and because of that, there's going to be a lot of platooning, a lot of pitching changes, a lot of matchups, and I think it really just comes down to, this sounds really cliche, but a lot of our pitchers are going to be in there just for potentially a batter or two, close and late, and if that's what it is, then you're going to have to basically get your guy out. It's going to be a scenario where, you're only going to face a couple guys and you're going to have to, obviously step up. I actually think that it's going to completely come down to our pitching. Our pitching has carried us throughout. I mean, they've proven time and time again that if this team can scratch across 3 or 4 runs, that should be enough to win. And I'm really hoping that that's the case this time as well. I also think, actually, just on a little bit of a side note, I mean, is this going to be like, for example, I guess you could say to a lesser extent, Billy Bean, but David Stern's actually showing that, like, you don't necessarily need an ace, and in fact, as a small market, you probably can't afford an ace or to invest that much money in an ace to be able to get deep into the playoffs. It makes me wonder if that's going to be the way sort of the future for the small markets, but I don't know.
It's definitely something that is completely not been seen before, like this good and deep of a bullpen, whereas conversely, this kind of starting rotation that lacks brand name pitchers. I mean, these guys, Gio Gonzalez is probably the most well-known talented pitcher, out of this group going into the year, or, with his track record as a veteran. Over Chastain, who's pretty much this year and a little bit last year had a breakout. Wade Miley, his complete career was up and down, and he had one good year, I think, with the Diamondbacks in the second year in the league, and beyond that, he's been pretty atrocious. So for these guys to be kind of our top 3 starters, none of these, I mean, it's just unbelievable. And I think that, Dodger fans are probably almost looking beyond the Brewers and to the World Series because of it. But in 7 games, I believe, this year against the Dodgers, the Brewers did win 3 of the games. I think that we've beaten Kershaw before. We're going to have to face him probably twice. He doesn't scare me that much. I think the key to the whole series is going to be actually our offense and specifically our right-handed bat. First of all, Lorenzo Cain, he's got to step it up. In the last week, even during this awesome winning streak, he really has not looked like himself. He's struggling a little bit. He needs to turn around immediately, especially with going against all these left-handers, starters and stuff. And then, of course, Ryan Braun. He lives for games like this. I have no worries about Ryan Braun. In fact, he thrives in this environment. So I feel he's going to get clutch hits when necessary. Hopefully, he doesn't make boneheaded running mistakes like he kind of did in the last series. But anyway, moving on, Ryan Braun's going to be awesome. The other place where we have right-handed bats, Orlando Arcia has a little bit of a hot streak going. He's going to be key to still get our 2 right-handed catchers. Obviously, you're going to have to contribute. Now, here's the thing. I'm thinking with these left-hand starters that, unfortunately, Jonathan Scope is probably going to get some starts at second over Travis Shaw, and he really needs to step up. I mean, look at his numbers as a Brewer. He hit pretty much near or below the Mendoza line. His OPS was terrible. His OPS was just atrocious. Like, he's just been terrible as a Brewer. And pretty much his whole season, even with the Orioles combined, is not a good year. He does have it in him. He had a great year last year with Baltimore, and I think he's talented. But when you look at his individual at-bats, he just does not seem to be putting together good at-bats right now. So maybe it's a mental thing right now, but we really need him to turn it on, and he could be a key player in this whole series. And unfortunately, that worries me. But I think he could be definitely a key contributor. And whoever else, other right-handed outfielder we leave on the roster, probably besides left-handed Curtis Granderson, whether it be most likely Keon Broxton over Dominguez Santana. Maybe they'll both be on. I'm not sure yet. But both or either of those guys have got to come through for us, too. I mean, Keon Broxton came up with runners in second and third in one of the games and struck out on like 3 pitches that looked terrible. We really need to contact Matt. That did not come through for us. With that being said, when he doesn't have those pressure situations, like when we were up by 4 runs already. He had a nice home run in Colorado in Game 3. Those are the kind of situations that Broxton thrives in. We need these clutch hits, guys on base, less than 2 outs, or whatever. We need clutch hits from our right-handed batters in this series, I believe. And other guys I think that are just perfect to have on a playoff roster, like Curtis Granderson. When he has his pinch hits, he knows how to get on base. He's left-handed. He can come in against the right-handed bullpen guys like, late in the game, Canley, Jansen, their closer or whatever, if we're down a run or something like that. Curtis Granderson's the perfect guy to put in there to start something going. And, so we have some really nice deep roster ourselves. I think offensively we match up fairly well to the Dodgers. In fact, I would take our offense overall with his depth over the Dodgers. So I think that we have an advantage offensively. I think we have advantage in the bullpen. Our obvious huge disparity is the starting pitching, where they have a huge advantage, especially just with Kershaw alone. But I think that whole X factor in the series is those guys that I mentioned earlier, Burns, Woodruff, and Peralta. If they get through this series without giving up runs with their outs that they need to get, I think we're going to be in really good shape, and we're going to be going to our second World Series in Brewers history. I'm going to predict the Brewers are actually going to win this in 6 games. What are your thoughts, Scott? What are your predictions?
I'm gonna say Brewers in 7 because of home field advantage. And when you think about it, think about what a potentially tougher road it would have been if we wouldn't have gone on that ridiculous winning streak and then beaten the Cubs at Wrigley to be able to win that division. I mean, we'd be talking about a wild card game instead of being in that wild card game. The Rockies wind up eventually winning that wild card game, but they wind up burning up all of their arms because they had to play just the day before, and I believe it was extra innings. And so, yeah, and it winds up not only do we have that, but we have home field throughout this run all the way up to the World Series anyway. So to be able to have all of that happen is absolutely phenomenal. So I'll say Brewers in 7. The only other thing I kind of wanted to bring up, the difference between the Rockies and the Dodgers. I have absolutely no stats to prove this whatsoever, but I really felt that well, think about this. When you're a little kid and you're practicing, you're just throwing up a baseball or whatever it is in the backyard, nobody stands there and goes, here's the 3-2 pitch. And he takes it for ball 4. Unbelievable. Nobody does that. Obviously you're going to you want to swing the bat. You want to hit the ball far. That's the way it is ever since you grew up, obviously, ever since you're a little kid. But I think that the Brewers overall really played on the aggressiveness of Rockies hitters. And I think there were a lot of instances where Rockies hitters were getting themselves out because Brewer pitching was throwing pitches that weren't strikes, but they're just throwing pitches that are off speed or dive out of the zone. And I think it got a lot of Rockies hitters out. I really think that Dodger hitters are a little bit more patient at the plate, maybe a little bit seasoned veteran types. That's going to be a lot harder to do this go around, but I guess we'll find out.
Yeah. And they do have the one guy that scares me on their team besides David Freese, is Chris Taylor, because I remember during the regular season, he had a couple, at least 1 3 or 4 hit game against the Brewers. And I'm like, we just cannot get this guy out. And he scares me a little bit because he can get on base at the top of their lineup. Even Kiki Hernandez, who's at this point kind of platooning at second base with Brian Dozier. Brian Dozier could be their X factor. He was acquired similarly like we acquired Scope to improve their second base, but has been pretty much almost regulated, just like Scope's, almost bench duty because of how poorly he's hit since the acquisition. So I think that, again, if we're going to throw a couple of lefties that most likely means Brian Dozier is going to factor into this from their side. So I think he's a key from their end. Obviously, their bullpen, besides Canley's Jansen, their setup guys, I don't think they have as strong the guys as they did last year when they made a run all the way to the World Series already. I think that they're weakened kind of at the back of their bullpen besides that. So I think they're vulnerable there. I think we can get to them as we lead up to that closer spot because so I think that's going to be a key And, yeah, I think still we do have to score runs out their starters, though. And it's Kershaw, Buehler, Hill, and Ryu. We've got to score off those guys. And they even have Alex Wood, another lefty who normally was a starter, who could factor in those middle innings or everything, too. No, the one thing that did make me realize, I actually attended game one of the NLDS, like I mentioned, the walk-off from Mustaka. It was an awesome game. However, there was some stress involved in that. Obviously, the Rockies coming back on Jeffers and tying it up after we were leading the whole game and whatnot. But going into extras, if we go past that 10th inning where the walk-off happened, to me, I was like, well, the Brewers are in trouble here because we're going to have to go to, like, Junior Guerra and have him pitch pretty much the rest of the game. I mean, because of the fact that we cannot really burn through any more of our arms. And we started this as a quote-unquote – if you have a quote-unquote bullpen game that goes into extra innings, your team's in trouble, in my opinion. So I think that it makes more sense to do these quote-unquote bullpen games at home because of that, because that way you could walk it off and not have to extend deep into extra innings with these guys. So anyway, with that being said, Junior Guerra does have the ability to eat up multiple innings, but usually when you're playing late in games where the run would mean the difference in your season and the postseason, you want to have still some bullpen options. So that's one drawback of these bullpen games, is that you want to try to avoid going to extra innings, it seems. But we shall see. It definitely fired up about the series. Home field advantage is huge. So I think, again, that game one, setting the tone, is going to be big. Whether or not, we've got to at least win one game in Milwaukee, most likely two of them. I mean, the first two games, I should say, before we head out to LA. I think that's going to be big. I'm not scared. I think we can win on the road, though, and I really think just the momentum is on us. That's why I think that the Brewers, I mean, at this point, I wouldn't be shocked if the Brewers completely swept the Dodgers. We're that hot. I don't foresee that happening. Like I said, I'm going to predict it go 6. And I just don't know. This feels like a dream ride, and that the house of cards could come crashing down with one terrible Wade Miley start or something. But I don't know. I think Counsell's going to play it really smart. If anyone shows they don't have it, he's going to go to someone else, because we have so many options of guys that can pitch multiple innings, including those X-factor guys I talked about. If someone doesn't have it, go to one of those guys and say, okay, we're going to need you to get more than 6 outs here, buddy. And that's fine. And I think that these guys are going to step up. And I really have this gut feeling that Freddie Peralta is going to somehow, granted he doesn't make a 25-man roster again, he's going to somehow factor in huge like he did on that first Cardinals game, bullpen game that we refer to. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about like just the role players that have really stepped up, and it's so funny because listening to the national telecast, they're talking about, oh wow, did you know, like they just have like some quip about how, oh, this Brewer player didn't have a home, and then they overcame adversity and wound up being on the roster. And they mentioned it for Arcia, they mentioned it for Kratz. I don't know, there's several other guys. Jessine, I think they were like, oh yeah, they signed him. They didn't expect Miley, obviously. I mean, there's so many guys like that have stepped up, and I don't know, it was just very, very interesting just to hear all that and just go through it and figure out what exactly these guys are trying to come up with. It did suck that.
Well, most of our team, the core players on our team, have been acquired. Well, besides the Kane signing, via trades, via acquisitions off the scrap heap, so to speak. And I think that's the amazing part about the Brewers run, is I don't think anyone saw this coming because of that. I think it said that only 17% of the Brewers I read this, that only like 17% of the Brewers WAR stats or whatever have come from homegrown players this year. So most of them are guys that have been, acquired via trade, or, not that much of it has come up through our system. Really, I mean, you've got Arcia, you've got Corbin Burns, but if you look at the rest of them, I mean, we acquired Chase Anderson, we acquired Kyle Davies, We signed Chastain. We basically took Wade Miley off the scrap heap. We traded for Gio Gonzalez. Pretty much everyone in our starting rotation. And then you look at the same thing with the hitters. I mean, obviously you trade for Yelich, which is humongous. But even the rest, some of the other guys, we pretty much brought James back from Japan. We just traded for Granderson. We traded for Domingo Santana. I mean, once again, not that many of these core players outside of us, our longtime franchise player Ryan Braun. There's really not that much homegrown talent, so to speak, that have got us at this point. And I think that's a rare thing for a World Series team. And that's why I think people are still doubting us getting to that point. But the fact that we're this far along and that we've got the momentum behind us, just the mere fact that we have not, I think we only lost 2 games in a row one time in September, really bodes well for a playoff series. I mean, because I think if we lose one game, we're going to come back and win the next night, and that's huge. And like I said, we really need to start that first game off with a win. I think it's going to be huge, setting the tone for the series and putting the pressure on the other team. It's so hard to be a fan when you are behind in a playoff series. You really feel like your back's against the wall. And I think it's similar with the players where you start to press a little bit. And I think that's what happened kind of with the Rockies. They almost came back to win that game 1, but then they lost anyway. And then the rest of the time, I felt that they were pressing, like, okay, it's a 5-game series. We cannot afford to outshoot, so we're going to have to win this game. They pressed in game 2. Backs completely up against the wall in game 3, and no pressure on the Brewers. Wade Miley goes out there and just shuts them down, and that's it. I mean, so I think that's really key at the beginning of the series to kind of get that lead. And the Brewers have, even in the individual games, as a microcosm of that, to get that lead early on with our bullpen is just awesome mentally to put pressure on the other team. I mean, in all those games, in fact, the Brewers have not been trailing in a game since Saturday, September 28th, or was it 29th? That's the last time we've been trailing after when we played the second game last homestand of the year against the Tigers. We have not trailed at all since then in any game. And I think that's huge with our bullpen looming with those 4 closers that we have in the back of the bullpen, Hader being one of them. I think that's really huge and puts tons of pressure on the other team, and it can force them to press to try to, scratch away hits or whatever and get back in it. And, I think it's really nerve-wracking. We can't put ourselves in that position because I don't think our offense is that much of like a comeback offense or whatnot. I mean, I think we have the firepower, but we've not shown to have huge rallies or anything like that. But so I just think it's so important mentally to get out to early leads in games and early lead in the series and put all the pressure on the other team. And I think that's when the Brewers are going to really thrive, and I hope that continues.
Yeah, I think, obviously it doesn't bode well for your team in a series when you're out hit by Orlando Arcia and Eric Kratz. Nothing against those guys, but nobody expects them, to have, 3 hits, 4 hits in a game. And, nobody on the Rockies was able to really do much of anything against our pitching, which is just absolutely ridiculous. So, I mean, obviously you think, hey, if we do the same thing, we're going to the World Series. I mean, that's easy enough. I mean, giving up 2 runs in three games, insane.
And I think that in a weird way, going into this, the Brewers have advantages because they do have home field advantage for this series. They are extreme underdogs, so they don't have as much pressure on them as the Dodgers do, in my opinion. The Dodgers were the World Series last year and they didn't win it. Their fans are expecting them to get to just step over the Brewers, get back there, and try to win it again. I think they're going to overlook the Brewers a little bit, and they're going to be taken aback by the fact of how good we actually are. And I think it's going to really bode well for us. With, again, the momentum that we have, 11-game winning streak, unbelievable, just unbelievable.
Yeah, and when you mentioned Kenley Jansen earlier, I mean, there's probably 6 guys in our bullpen alone that I trust more than that guy right now. I mean, he's just – I don't know. You don't know what you're going to get with that guy, and I wouldn't trust him at all to be my closer at this point. But The Dodgers have kind of stuck with him in part because they don't have a better option. And I guess that says a lot about the strength and the depth of the Brewers bullpen because, if something happens like that, we have other people to step up.
Yeah, so, whoever we do throw out there as starters, it just has to hang in with their counterpart for the first 3 to 5 innings of the game. If that's what they're asked to do, they have to hang with them and not get behind. The Brewers get behind by 3 or 4 runs before the 5th inning. It's a whole different ball game because it takes them out of their element. They're not going to be able to utilize their bullpen to full effectiveness. And, I think it's really important for us to either have a small lead going into those middle innings or at least be close to a tie game like it was against the Cubs in game 163 where it was 1-1. I still had uber confidence when it was 1-1. Brewers going to win that game because we had a better bullpen than Cubs, period. And that's exactly how it played out. So I feel the same way about the Dodgers. We have a better bullpen. And like you said, I think all 4 of our quote-unquote closers are better than Kenley Jansen at this point, and they've shown it. So that's fine. I think it's the starters on the Dodgers that are obviously the things that we just have to get beyond. And outside of Kershaw, I have a ton of respect for Buehler. I think he's going to be a future ace also. But the other guys, Hill and Ryu, I'm fine. I think the Brewers can hit them. So it's really just if we continue to be able to beat Kershaw, I think this is going to be over pretty quickly.
Yeah, actually. And when it comes down to facing a guy like Kershaw, who, like you mentioned, hasn't had a lot of postseason success, but at the same time, everybody knows that he's one of the most dominant pitchers in the league. Having said that, what approach would you take with him? Because there's kind of 2 schools of thought here. You could, number one, you could try to be patient with him, grind out those at-bats, and get his pitch count up in hopes to get to the bullpen early. But Kershaw doesn't really walk guys, so I'm not sure that that's the best option. The other option is you could try to be aggressive knowing that the first pitch you get from Kershaw is probably going to be the best pitch, the most hittable pitch anyway, that you'll get from him. You could try to tee off on that, but if you do that and you don't get those hits, Kershaw is going to throw a complete game against you. So I'm just interested in hearing what approach you would take.
I would say the third of those options that you mentioned, that try to get to him early in the count because, like you said, he's not going to go to 3-ball, 2-strike counts. If he even goes 1-1, 2-2 on you, he's taking you out. He's not going to go. He very rarely goes to 3-ball counts even. He's not a nibbler. He's going to attack you, so you attack him back early in the count. I'm fine that, you run the risk of him being able to go further innings if you're just, rolling over on ground balls. But you could also start up a rally real early. And like I said, that's huge for motivation. This is the playoffs. You're there to swing the bat. Obviously you want to put together good at bats, but you have to have an approach, like you said. And I think every batter is going to have their own approach. It's not like the pitching coach the hitting coach is going to take everybody's side. Okay, I want you swinging at the first pitch because Kershaw is going to start you off with a fastball strike, so go after it. No, I think every batter will have its own philosophy on how to attack them. But yes, overall, I would say that it would make plenty of sense to try to attack them early. That's really your only chance against Kershaw, and it has shown to work. So that's the route I would go is, go after, put your bat on the ball and see what happens because he's not totally unhittable. I think once you get beyond the first couple of pitches and he's got you where he wants you or he's ahead in the count, that's when you're in trouble because then he's going to make you hit his pitch. He's going to, so again, he's not going to walk guys. So, you're not going to be able to put together, a 6-7 pitch at bat against him. It's just not happening. So you key on a pitch in the first 2 pitches, and if you get it, you go after it. That's my opinion. But
yeah, I would agree with that philosophy, especially in the playoffs, only because if it's the regular season, maybe Kershaw is only out there for 100 pitches. But in the playoffs, if he's pitching his game, there's no reason to take him out. He could throw 150. I don't care. I want Kershaw in there. If I'm the Dodgers.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're a Brewers, you want him out, obviously. But I don't know. I think we can get to him, and I think we can hang with him definitely. And we'll see. Obviously, we don't have a pitcher of that caliber, especially in the starting rotation. But they also don't have a Josh Hader type. So it's one of those things where that beginning part of the game is really important for our offense, and the later part of the game is going to be more important for their offense. And it's just the way the teams are built, they're kind of opposite. But I really don't think the Dodgers are a better team than us. And in fact, they didn't win as many games this year as us. So that in and of itself shows who the better team is, and that's the Milwaukee Brewers.
Yeah, they definitely got off to a slow start, but when you think about it, they really had to kind of catch a little bit of fire at the end. And, unfortunately, the Diamondbacks swooned a little bit the second half, especially in September. But the Rockies and Dodgers were both hanging around. And, again, I mean, obviously it was just like us and the Cubs. It literally came down to, one game to determine the division. And, because of that, the Dodgers got the little bit easier road, and here we are playing each other.
Yeah. Like I said, I would still be confident if the Dodgers had a home field in this series, just because of the momentum the Brewers have. But the fact that the Brewers do have that home field advantage, especially if it comes down to game 6 or 7, is going to be huge. And we'll see what happens, but it should be a great series for sure. Definitely expect you to probably take that ride out to LA to maybe see some Brewer games, or fly on back to Milwaukee. Game 6 and 7, maybe. Scott, I guess we'll have to play that by ear. Otherwise, I guess we'll see you somewhere near the front row for the World Series games, because that's where we're going.
Yeah, let's hope so. I don't know that I can afford anywhere near the front row, but maybe the front row of the 4th level.
I'm not sure that you can afford that either, actually. Or maybe be able to have that opportunity.
One of those obstructed view terrace box.
Yeah, that's possible. Anyway, so unfortunately Vince wasn't able to join us. I'm sure he would have a lot to contribute to this conversation as well, even though he is a Yankee/Dodger fan when he's not rooting for the Brewers. So I'm sure he's pretty happy with this matchup too. But if Vince were here, I'm sure he's confident the Brewers are going to take the series without much of a problem as well. So I don't want to speak for him, but he seems very confident in the Brewers at this point. So
yeah, if the Brewers don't wind up winning the World Series, I'm rooting for no one, because when you look at it, you have the reigning world champs in Houston, and then you have storied franchises of Boston and LA. Not really interested in any of those teams getting another ring.
Yeah, and I guess looking to our next podcast where we'll be doing our World Series preview, we'll be talking about a preview of the Brewers versus either the Red Sox or the Astros, where they would not have home field advantage for the World Series. However, if you had to quote unquote pick your poison, do you have a preference over either of those teams, either the reigning World Series champ Houston Astros or the juggernauts? Was it 108 win Boston Red Sox of this year?
I'm not rooting for anything. I don't even want to think about it. Gross. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you put a gun to my head, I'd say pull the trigger. No, I'd say, I guess Houston, just because, it's kind of nice that they, built together like a good franchise by drafting high after years of mediocrity. And I guess, I don't know.
Well, yeah, it would be a good story also with Stearns being a former member of their front office and coming back to bring his team all the way to the World Series and possibly get them their first World Series championship ever. Also, with the Astros winning it last year, I don't believe they'll be quite as hungry. Not that they wouldn't be, but also the Astros are kind of built. Well, we could talk about this next episode, I'm sure. But, the Astros have 5 great starting pitchers. They're built kind of to win in the regular season. When it comes to playoffs, really only 3, possibly 4 of those starters really factor in, obviously, as starters. So their bullpen's not that great. They had to trade for a closer who was a wife beater or whatever. So I don't have particular respect for that move. And I don't know. I think that their offense is obviously incredible, but I think that would be a great series, Brewers versus Astros. But we'll talk about that in our next podcast, where we'll be doing our World Series preview at that point. So hopefully you guys remember to tune in. Other than that, I don't know if there are any other predictions or things you want to say about the Milwaukee Brewers, but it's been an unbelievable ride, and I'm looking forward to going to George Redlands Saturday morning, getting some free hamburgers as we kick off the NLCS with a win, hopefully. And wow, just unbelievable to think that it's been 31 years since we've even won 11 games in a row, and here we are. So.
Yeah, by the way, I guess I should definitely throw this out there, I suppose. Of course, email us at whatever our thing is. I don't know. Twitter is
Brew Review Podcast at gmail.com.
Oh, yeah, that's the one. Otherwise, I mean, obviously, it's right there on the front of the podcast that you're looking at or whatever it is. So on YouTube. So that's a big part of it. But otherwise, what is it? Brew Review 1. That's our Twitter handle. If you have any fan reactions to being at any of those Rockies games, otherwise great fan reactions of wins, in the future here against the Dodgers and hopefully in the World Series as well. Definitely send those our way. Hopefully we win 12 in a row. And if we do, I want to see a lot of we're going to start up a thread just where everyone can post their pictures of them crushing George Webb hamburgers. So should be pretty interesting, but we'll see what we can do with some of that footage. I'm sure we could, between the two of us, we could put together some interesting videos.
And Scott, if that happens, I will mail you out your free burger out to you in Las Vegas. I also be sending out to a free burger to one of George's biggest fans and Brew Review's biggest fans also, and that'd be Private Detective Mark Antoniak. He loves George Webb's burgers, and he always really gets excited when the Brewers score those 5 runs in the regular season because he gets 5 for 5 the next day. And he's going to be really pumped about this. He's been waiting at least half his life for the Brewers to get these free hamburgers again. So he's going to be pretty pumped. I guess that wraps it up, Scott. Pretty pumped about this possibility of getting to the World Series one guy that I'm really happy for, I know you're a huge fan of, Bob Uecker. Seeing him celebrate in the clubhouse with these guys, been pretty awesome, keeping that guy young, and would love for the Brewers to bring home a World Series trophy while he's still amongst us. So been listening to him on the radio ever since I was a small child, laying next to my clock radio and having him serenade me to sleep every night, as the Brewers typically lost back then. But anyway, still pretty awesome.
That's right. Our inside source, Tom Carter, said that he said that he bumped into Uke, and Uke was absolutely pumped about it. Just couldn't be happier. He said he looked like a kid on Christmas. So thanks, Tom Carter. Really appreciate that.
All right. TC is not going to be giving us these stories anymore. Anyway, what can you do? So, all right. Go Brewers and stay classy, Milwaukee.
Go Brewers.
Brewers!